I feel like diet culture sets you up to never be good enough.
Did you burn 500 calories on the treadmill today? No? Me either.
I mean, anybody can sit with us. We're just really not about diet culture.
But literally, happiness doesn't come from a low-calorie, high-intensity life. I actually do like carrots.
I do too. They're my favorite.
Welcome to the Fit Fueled Free podcast.
So basically, diets suck. Hey guys, welcome to episode 43. I'm Jenna.
I'm Danielle.
And today we are going to talk about what diet culture is. And we just thought it was appropriate kind of because of what's going on right now in the world. And we just see it weaning its way into every aspect of our lives. It's always prevalent, but it just feels so much more prevalent at the surface right now. And so we kind of wanted to break down the way that diet culture has forced its way into nutrition, and Danielle's going to talk about that, and then I'm going to cover how it has kind of forced its way into movement and exercise and the fitness part of things. And we're just going to give some things to look out for if you're someone who either doesn't know what it is and wants to have awareness, or if you're trying to break away from that mentality. And then also share maybe just some things of like ways that you can kind of break away from being controlled and consumed and kind of living by the rules that diet culture places on so many of us.
Yeah. So this is my definition of diet culture that I've written out after reading from so many different sources and just my work and conversations with Jenna and life experience. Diet culture is a societally constructed viewpoint surrounding food, exercise, and bodies, the thin ideal. The dialogue encourages self-shaming behaviors and imposes unattainable health standards. This leads to people often approaching nutrition and exercise behaviors from a place of shame-induced self-hatred, fueled by the idea that if they can get to a goal weight, physique, or size, that they will be worthy, happy, healthy, and accepted. It surrounds us and is deep-seated. From the outside looking in, our diet culture offers glimmers of hope and promise for a better life, but this exists entirely on false pretenses.
You nailed that.
Thanks. It's annoying that that's something we even have to define, but I think, like you're saying, like being able to recognize it, it's not going to be a snap of the finger, oh yeah, this doesn't affect me anymore, but when we know something's going on, then we can deal with it a little bit more than if it's not labeled. At least I think that's more helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's so many people too who just don't even, unless you are in an environment where people are actively trying to fight it, it's like you almost don't even know about it because we've been brought up in it and lived in it for so long. And until you realize like, hey, I don't think living in this like societal constructed set of like rules in terms of fitness and nutrition is right. Yeah. You don't really even think to challenge it. And I've had multiple people be like, I didn't even know what diet culture was until like I read your posts and listened to some of your guys' podcast episodes where you guys reference it. And I didn't really know about it either until I walked through my own things. And then I was like, this is like not okay. And you come out like on the other side and want to fight it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you start to get like a taste of what it is. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing you know, you're on the other end of this beast. Like, how many times do you and I send things to each other like, what the? Yep. Like, it's like almost every day. We're like, yeah. Are you serious right now? Like, is this really happening? Mm-hmm. So I just listed out some different places that I see diet culture imposing these rules. And obviously, I'm a proponent of intuitive eating, me and Jenna both. And I know that intuitive eating gets a bad rap, and we've touched on that before, but I would like to say that like my interpretation of intuitive eating really does consist of not only your body's knowledge, which is like, oh, I eat what my body tells me, but it's also your brain knowledge, because we can't completely separate those two things. We have both. Our brain is part of our body, but that's like huge, and we can't forget that we know these things. So I'm not asking anyone to get rid of that information, but it doesn't have to come from a negative place. And I think that's such an important distinguisher. And who knows, like we could figure out there's a different way to look at it, but the best way I can know to describe it is if you're doing something from a positive standpoint of trying to take care of yourself versus doing it because you think you're not good enough, that's the difference, but it's quite a fine line. So I'm going to run through these things and hopefully it will help to kind of see, because most people feel, well, if I don't have these harsh structures and rules in place, aren't I going to be unhealthy? And if unhealthy to you means, are you going to gain weight? The answer could be yes, it could be no, it could be completely neutral, but that's not synonymous. Weight and health are not synonymous terms. And I think like if that's an idea you haven't approached with much curiosity yet, I would really encourage you to do so. Do some research on that and look into it. And we can absolutely provide some resources for that. But the book Body Respect is a really great place to start on that. And just Googling the harm of weight stigma would be another great place to start. But I'm going to make a note to myself to include some links in the description this week because it's worth that's huge, because if you feel like weight and health are synonymous, then it's going to be really hard to swallow any of the messages that that Jenna and I ever talk about. So that's probably a good reminder just in general.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Okay, so the first thing that I wrote down was portion sizes. So this is why I kind of had that explanation to preface this, because I have come to really dread talking about portion sizes. And the reason being, I don't have the authority to tell you what your body needs. So that probably sounds really wild, and hear me out. I'm not disregarding like nutrient needs. I'm not saying that none of that's important and that there isn't like a balance of different macronutrients that you need in a certain quantity, but not every single person's going to be the same. So if we both need 2,000 calories, for an example, you and I probably are going to have slightly varying intakes of our carbs, proteins, and fats day to day, one, which means eating the same exact way every single day is going to be very limiting. And two, your body might be more prone to being anemic than mine. I might be more prone to needing more magnesium. Like there's just like different things that our bodies are going to go through and need. Like one of us might have harder time with vitamin D, like just random things. And so to say that, like, yes, we want to meet our basic needs, but getting a balance. And it's also not like imperative that you get every single nutrient to its maximum capacity every single day, because our bodies just don't work like that. If nutrient deficiencies were that severe, like we would be in danger a lot more often. And I'm not underplaying the importance of nutrition, but it really, like, it's not as serious a lot of the time as we make it out to be. And for me to tell someone this is exactly what you need to eat, that's very limiting, because then it's no different than any other person out there. Yes, I have a degree as a dietitian. I know nutrition science, but I don't know all of your hunger and fullness cues every day. I don't know what drives you to eat emotionally or what drives you to avoid food because of stress. I don't know your food preferences. And sure, like I ask people these questions, but if I'm still giving you a plan to follow, we're disregarding a lot of that information if we're just going off of, oh, this is exactly what you should eat. So that's where I think it really comes back to what the individual needs. And if you want to eat salmon for dinner versus tofu, eat the salmon, it's going to be different than the tofu is, like nutritionally, and it might throw your macros off, but like it's just not that serious. So that's where I think the portion sizes are pretty misguided, because I can't exactly tell someone what they should be eating and that's going to actually work for them. And I learned that lesson the hard way with a lot of trial and error with different people, because it just doesn't work out like that. And I find the less strict guidelines and meal plans I provide to people, the better they seem to learn about themselves. And it didn't take me very long working outpatient to figure that one out. Yeah. So I can understand where the guidance comes from, and trying to help with education. I think it's important to like know the reasons that we eat different food groups so that you're armed with that brain knowledge, but it's gonna vary. And the other thing too, like I blanketly would state that there is no food that's bad or off limits. However, I'm going to use Jenna as an example with her psoriasis that she's talked about. We know that there are certain foods that she has to keep limited or else she's going to directly have a flare up, because she has proven that to her, like her body has shown her that time and time again. And so ideally she's going to limit those foods, but she's flexible enough to allow it to some extent. Mm-hmm. But like she tries to keep it down. So those foods are not bad for Jenna, but they are going to exacerbate a symptom. But if we just like say, oh, well, because those foods cause psoriasis or some type of inflammation in someone's body, they must not be good for us at all. But if I leave those foods out with my history of my eating disorder, I very easily get triggered to start wanting to restrict other foods for no reason. I get super tightly controlled. My anxiety around food goes up. I know all of these things, but it doesn't mean I'm not susceptible to them. So like, you cannot say that we're almost the same age. We have different lifestyles for physical activity. And so like for us to say, this is the portion size you should eat if you're this, roughly sized woman, like it's not the same at all. It's different. And we have different dietary needs for different experiences that we have with our own unique health journeys. So I just like, that's just one example of where all of the people online who say, oh, a woman needs a 1,500 calorie diet, or, first of all, those calories are given because it's assumed that everyone wants to try and lose weight, because that's really too low of intake for almost every single person who's going to be listening to this podcast. Well, probably everyone, because I don't think infants are listening to this. And so, yeah, everyone's needs are really higher than that. But over time, our bodies can adapt to not utilize much more than that because we starve them. So yeah, that kind of covers even a little bit more than just the portion sizes. It kind of touches on the macros and calorie counting. It's so limiting. But I completely understand where people want that structure. I get why people ask for that. But so often someone wants to know what they're not doing right because they feel like their body's not changing the way that it's supposed to be. And to me, I've had to have so many conversations with people that like, there's nothing wrong with your nutrition. So if you're thinking you're unhealthy because your body isn't the size you want it to be, like really what you're thinking are completely two different things. Yeah. So do you want me to keep going, or do you want to like?
Yeah, you can go.
Okay.
Yeah, we can cover it. You can just cover all your stuff.
Okay. So with, I guess in the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, the whole clean eating, quote unquote, thing has really taken over. And for a long time, I felt like that was the best way to describe nutrition, where you can have balance as long as you're eating clean most of the time. And obviously now I think a little bit differently about that. So Jenna and I actually were just talking about this yesterday about ingredients of things, like trying to distinguish between why some products, like a protein powder, for example, could have this like plethora of additives and preservatives and food colorings and artificial sweeteners when another one doesn't, and like trying to distinguish, oh, is it okay for me to want to make that choice? I think, yeah, you have to consider how it makes you feel physically, like in your digestive system. You have to consider the taste preference and like your need for it, but also like realizing that if we're afraid of additives, like to the point where we can't consume something without any known evidence that it's harmful, which we really don't have for most of the ingredients in food. So it really is more of like that orthorexic fear standpoint that our recent culture of clean eating has imposed, which in my opinion has elevated a lot of the things that we've realized. Oh, like you don't have to avoid fat, you don't have to avoid carbs. So it's like, oh, well, now you can't eat anything that has more than 5 ingredients to it. And it's just like, okay, well, here's another rule that's going to make it, one, more expensive, which automatically means now there's a divide because different socioeconomic classes cannot adequately or equitably, that's the word, like meet their needs then, because you have removed the ability of that to happen when we say that you can only be healthy enough if you're eating clean. So that's problematic because it's just based, it's like made up. It's like a fashion trend. Like something that was in style 10 years ago is not in style today. Like that's just our culture's way of saying, oh, well, you can be happy because now we're not doing low fat. Now we're doing low carb, even though a lot of health professionals don't think that's necessary. We're doing low carb and we're doing clean eating and we're doing intermittent fasting. And they all have a lot of contradictions with each other, which also means that none of it can be 100% true, because how can all of those things be true at the same time? That it doesn't work, you know? So it's a lot of, it's just imposed to give people something else to buy, to do. I mean, how many clean eating recipe websites and cookbooks are out there? And
so many.
Like meal plan subscriptions and services. Like it's a phrase that we're like, oh, that's safe, and people think that if they eat better ingredients that they're going to lose weight, and that is not, like, no, like that's not true. That's going to happen unless there was a change in your physical activity or your overall caloric intake. Like that's not going to change. So it's frustrating that that's held with such a high regard, because it's really mythical. Now, I'm not saying that you may not find that you feel better if you eat something that's more wholesome, in the sense of doesn't have as many preservatives or additives or whatever, because some people are sensitive to certain ingredients, but it's not just like a blanket statement. And we really throw around the way we even talk about those processed foods, because I would really like to point out that almond milk is an extremely highly processed food with lots of additives, but no one ever complains about that.
Nope, because it's supposed to be quote unquote healthier.
Yeah, so how is that possible? It's just not. That's wrong. And there's nothing wrong with almond milk. But now some people make almond milk just by, processing almonds and adding water to it. That has essentially, like, that's not milk. Like, that's not a substitute. It doesn't magically have a high protein content and the calcium and vitamin D that you would get out of the other milk. So, like, it's not comparable, and it's really just drinking almond water. So that's still not, like, better, because certain foods are processed the way that they are to be nutritionally adequate. So it's just like, I really encourage people to consider what they're being told, because it even comes to me in a way sometimes where I'm questioning my own self about things I know. But then I always come back to, if we're talking about, which I know this isn't everyone's situation, but if we're talking about recovery, if I label one single food as bad food, I have shot myself in the foot with every ounce of work I've done with anyone. And so if we're neutralizing food, which must be done in order to reach, like, true recovery, like, you cannot go around with these harsh food rules in order to, like, get to a place where you can function. Wow. So if that is the case for someone recovering from an eating disorder, why is that not the case for someone who isn't? I'm sure there are a handful of people out there who really are not affected by this kind of stuff at all. They really have that approach of like, you know, food is whatever, I wouldn't eat if I didn't have to. But I don't think that's very many people. I have not met very many people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if just because you don't have an eating disorder doesn't mean that your behaviors aren't disordered and that you couldn't have like a more well-rounded life. But I understand that that's not everyone's, not their goal. They don't value that. Like they want to just be that disciplined version. The issue is that that is typically going to fail after a certain period of time, but that's like a whole nother story. But I always come back to those truths that I've learned in helping people recover. And I know it makes me very sensitive, but I'm just like, well, if you have to be nice to yourself because you have an eating disorder, why do you deserve to not be nice to yourself just because you don't yet or don't ever have an eating disorder? So I'm pretty extreme in that thought. I just can't really, like, I respect other opinions, but I can't see that way anymore, because I think it's totally convoluted.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. And that's where, like, we call clean eating, like, it's a lifestyle change. It's, what's the other term? Oh, the wellness, like wellness diet. It's still rules.
Mm-hmm.
Saying that you have to eat food that has minimal ingredients is no more or less positive than saying you can't eat more than 50 grams of fat a day.
Yep.
Or 50 grams of carb a day, or whatever your rule is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just regarded more highly now because that's what many influencers and professionals promote. So you have to really like look at your sources, because if there wasn't something that we were doing wrong as people, and we didn't have to fuel billion-dollar industries with our insecurities, because we're constantly told from the second that we can understand anything that we're not good enough if we don't do things a certain way, then a lot of things would change, and people in higher power are not going to allow that to happen.
Right.
So that's why, like, part of why Jenna and I are fighting against this culture, because it's unrealistic and it's unfair.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows up in those places, which kind of explains the good foods versus bad foods, which I genuinely don't believe. That's not to say certain foods, again, can't make you feel good or feel bad. And I don't just mean mentally, like physically. And then that just means it's probably not in your best interest to consume it on a regular basis. But that's person to person. Like, you can figure that out. You just have to give yourself a little bit of permission in order to be able to allow that. And that's like why we have these conversations. So in restriction, so basically this is a perfect timing because right now everyone's losing their minds. I understand where the fear is coming from. One, we're stuck more at home, so we have time to obsess about the things that we don't like about ourselves because we have no distraction. And two, we are afraid that if we can't keep up with our perfect quote unquote nutrition habits and exercise routines, that our bodies won't be appropriate for summer. All kinds of hideous things have been said regarding that. And that fear and desire to restrict is a direct result of our culture's standards. Because if you gain weight while you're in quarantine, one, that's not permanent, because if you go back to other behaviors that were sustainable for you, likely you will see a fluctuation. If your standards of living were inappropriate because they were not actually in line with what you want for your life, and you gain weight, then that might just mean you need to like reevaluate what you were expecting of yourself. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow, but it's okay. And that's where I'll give that reminder that your worth does not come from your body size. And I know I'm not sitting in a larger body saying that, and I will always, like, I always see that and know that. So I'm sure some people want to take that with a grain of salt, but your worth, it just doesn't change. Society does treat people differently, that's for sure, but that's not your inherent worth. And that's why we're talking through these things, to find peace. Because if you're doing all that stuff and the second that you stop, your body changes, one, that's okay. You didn't fail, but just be aware that if you're exercising at a certain level and then you stop, your body is going to change. Not immediately, but it will.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, you don't have to, and we're going to talk more about exercise in a bit when we like go to Jenna's side of things, but it's just factual. It is what it is, but it's not right or wrong. And you're allowed to change your mind about what you do and how you spend all of your time. And if you have more time now to eat more meals at home that you're cooking and to be more active because you're not working right now, like, that's great too, but it doesn't mean that you fail when life goes back the other way. Like, sure, learn from this experience, but you can always change. Like, we're not in a state of permanence. And I think that's something that our diet culture also assumes. Oh, like, if I get to this perfect body, oh, everything's fine, I'm going to have this better life. And it's like, well, if you get to this perfect body, quote unquote, and that's not actually like a realistic size for yourself, it's not going to stay that way if it even decides to, but unless you continue all those behaviors. But sometimes that even won't work because your body will not do what your body doesn't want to do.
Right.
And that has been proven with a lot of weight loss research at this point. Okay, so am I missing anything here? I feel like we could probably go on for hours and hours on the same exact topic, but inflammatory foods, I do want to touch on that as well.
Yeah.
Inflammation is going to happen in your body, and it needs to happen, because if it didn't, there are functions like immunity. Like, if your body couldn't get inflamed, it wouldn't be able to fight something off. So the idea that we can't put anything inflammatory into our system, like, that's kind of misguided. And we hear a lot about omega-3s, like the fats that's healthier fat than omega-6s. But time and time again, I read articles, and at the bottom it says we don't actually know the proper ratio. We're speculating that that's what we need because we get more of those other things, but I'm not 100% sure that it's not just assumed that we get those other fats because we eat fried food as Americans, which, like, is such an overgeneralization of our population. But it's not even 100% known. And trying to eliminate these foods because of worrying that your body's in a state of chronic acidosis. First of all, your pH balance is going to remain pretty close to 7, because if it didn't, you would die. Your body already does that. And secondly, if you want to try and consume more foods that are anti-inflammatory, I put that in air quotes, but like have darker colors, antioxidant benefits, things like that, those have been linked to promoted health. So sure, go ahead and focus on increasing that. And if that by nature means you increase some of these quote unquote inflammatory foods, great. But like, if you're already also fine, you don't have to go like changing things around just for the sake of it necessarily at all. So just a gentle reminder there. Same thing with sugar. Like, sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar. Your body doesn't have a hierarchy of clean sugar versus refined sugar. It doesn't work like that. So
I'm glad you said that.
Don't shame yourself. And also, if you put Crystal Light in your water to drink water because you hate the taste of water, please don't let people shame you for doing that either, because I'll tell you what's worse than drinking some sucralose. And food coloring is dehydration, because one of those things will kill you. The other one, there is no evidence that it will. There's the amount of any of those things you would have to consume for it to be deadly.
It's astronomical.
It is. Yeah. So like, that's the kind of crap. It's like, okay, so one, you're not hydrated. Okay, now, well, if you don't like the taste of water, you're screwed, essentially. You have no choice. And then what does that do to people? Now I don't drink water at all. I drink more soda because I'm like, well, screw it.
Yep.
So it's like, it's just these limiting factors that make it just so impossible.
Yeah.
And it's nonsense. But obviously, artificial, in case this is unclear to anyone, it may not be obvious, artificial sweeteners will not hold calories, whereas regular sugar, brown sugar, coconut sugar, cane sugar is going to have calories. That is different. But I'm just making a point about what's approved and not approved. All right. So another thing that's been rearing its ugly head right now is the fear of emotional eating. And that's a really big diet culture problem, because it is often assumed that someone in a larger body must overconsume food. And you cannot know what someone eats based on their body size. If you think that you can, I don't mean to be rude, but I just promise you, you're wrong. I used to think that, and I've met so many people that eat less than me and exist in a body several times larger than me, and that was proven to me very quickly out of school. And the fact that I didn't know that graduating with my degree is disgusting, but it is the case. You cannot judge someone's food habits by their body size. Yeah. And that's why it's problematic that the quote unquote obesity epidemic is represented and someone's always eating fast food when that's the case. Like, that's complete trash. But I will digress on that. Because emotional eating is not immoral. It is not a sin, even though I know gluttony is listed as a sin. I think we have to kind of separate ourselves from being like labeling ourselves as a glutton because we eat emotionally, from what that is really referring to. And like, I'm not going to talk about like that, but I think there are cases in certain bodies of beliefs that do still put limitations on people, that in 2020 and what we know, like with psychology and everything and like how bodies work, they may not be completely realistic anymore, because you have to think some of the things that have been written, like how long ago was that? So you cannot take literally everything. Like, don't put yourself down because of that. I have heard that from many people, that like they're brought up to believe that. And I was raised Catholic, so it's not that we didn't talk about that stuff, but it's a little bit differently how you get taught about religion as a Catholic. But anyway, I just want to say, like, if that's something that's ever crossed your mind, please don't like put that on yourself, because that's not an immoral thing. If you feel like you have a problem with emotional eating or you have binge eating disorder, that is a condition that can be addressed. But the only way that's addressed is by giving yourself full permission. Restriction actually makes all of that worse. So it's kind of, funnily enough, it all comes full circle, because at the end of the day, telling yourself these hard rules and labeling yourself as nasty, like words, not as nasty, but with nasty words, it's just going to further cause harm to yourself. So emotional eating can be life-saving. Often children have no way when they're having anything bad happen to them, and this can range from severe abuse to just having had a really bad day at school that turned into, oh, like, I don't know how to talk about this to anyone, so I'm going to, eat this brownie because it tastes good, but mom says I can only have one brownie a day. So next thing I know, I have hordes of candy wrappers under my bed because I'm hiding this because I've been told food is bad. So like, it could have come from absolutely nowhere, but because of the shame that our society puts on sugar and dessert and eating when you're upset, it has turned into something that I think gets blown out of proportion a lot. Like binge eating is a severe condition and it is very prevalent, but it also, I think emotional eating gets labeled as a problem just because sometimes we eat chocolate when we're upset and we think that's wrong. But it can save people's lives, and it also can be a part of a healthy relationship with food. And I think right now, especially when we're in like what Jenna was saying last week, this like collective trauma that we're all experiencing, I am certainly not going to judge you for using food to cope. If you feel like you want to implement other coping mechanisms, sure, great, that's wonderful. Ultimately, we shouldn't ever have only one coping mechanism, but sometimes we're in a situation in life where we do, and putting yourself down for that is not helpful. And a lot of people say, oh, I'm not putting myself down. It's the fact that I don't put myself down that I'm in this situation. That it doesn't work like that. You still are, like if that's a thought process, which is totally normal. But I promise that permission like has to happen. And it is okay. And even like I still have to remind myself that periodically, like I am allowed to use food emotionally, but I have learned that because I'm not bad for doing that, it helps me to utilize other things. And that has nothing to do with like desire for weight management or anything like that. I just know sometimes eating food isn't going to make me feel better. And because I don't feel like it's off limits, it freed up my ability to go do other things. And I think that's kind of like the best way to describe how important the permission part is. Because it just is so essential. And there's a difference between true permission and just feeling like you're giving into something. And I think that's where things get very mixed up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But yeah, emotional eating is definitely, it is not wrong or bad. And the last thing I want to touch on, and this probably, like, we're just like brushing the surface, honestly, on the way that this stuff presents, but these are some of the like biggest things that I see that get in people's way of being like okay day to day with food. But just a reminder that you don't have to drink a gallon of water a day. To say that everyone's water needs are the same is also like very silly. And sometimes drinking too much water and not enough electrolytes can harm people. And that presents in many different ways. Also, like if you're literally going to the bathroom so many times a day that you can't function in your job, which can happen to people who consume that much water, like you're probably overdoing it. And it's only been a handful, but any renal and urology specialists I've ever spoken to about this say pale yellow to clear urine is adequate. Like you do not have to push fluids past the point where you're feeling like adequately hydrated. And reminder, fruits and vegetables and other fluids do have water. Coffee does not become anti-water just because it's coffee.
Yeah.
Like that's not real. Fluid is still hydrating your body. So don't like stress about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those are like the big places where I really see our diet culture making hard rules when it comes to nutrition. I know that was like pretty broad because I like touched on kind of like every part of the way that we eat. But yeah, just trying to like give yourself a little bit more credit and question the sources of this information, I think is important. Like ultimately, what is it benefiting you to make these changes? And if the answer is it's only benefiting you because you're manipulating your body, that is likely going to be something that leads to failure and not because you suck. just because it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any other nutrition things that came to your mind at all?
I don't think so. I think you covered a vast majority of the main things that people are probably seeing and struggling with in terms of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well,
Yeah.
you want to jump into how it prevents in exercise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So unfortunately, diet culture, I think, for the most part, probably runs the fitness industry. Because I think I don't have statistics, but I mean, 90% at least of the reason why a majority of people probably get into fitness in the first place is for a weight-centric reason. And I think diet culture I know diet culture is to blame for that. And it's basically like the whole premise with fitness and diet culture is it perpetuates the idea that exercise is nothing more than just another way to shed calories. And so the goal setting that's focused around, fitness when it's run by diet culture is focusing on achieving like a desired aesthetic through weight loss and muscle gain. So it kind of presents itself as you're only successful with fitness if you look through the lens of losing inches, losing pounds, losing percentages of body fat, which I think right off the bat presents itself in it's a negative way, in a negative and a shameful way for people and it also makes it very, in my opinion, exclusive. Because of that, because it causes almost like a lack of adherence, because when exercise is turned into like something that people are doing purely for weight loss and to change the way that we look because of like diet culture's rules, we start to associate it with unpleasant notions such as like discipline, restriction, punishment, and pain. And so there are a handful of people who, it doesn't matter what they're going through, like they want this desired aesthetic so much that they'll put up with that. But then there's another handful of people who that turns them away from it. And so because of that, when exercise and movement should be all inclusive, we know through science and like studies, like the positive benefits that it has on our bodies, on our emotional health, like on our sleep, like all of these things that have nothing to do with aesthetics, which should honestly be the driving factor behind why you get into movement and exercise in the first place. Diet culture completely strips what we know factually about the benefits of exercise and focuses on one thing, which is the aesthetics. And because of these unpleasant and like negative emotions, it actually makes it exclusive. Because if that is like the driving factor behind why you should be getting into fitness, one, it like excludes people in the sense who are already in like a slim body, who are naturally in a thin body, because if the whole point behind getting into exercise is to lose weight, someone who's naturally thin may be like, okay, well, if that's the whole reason to exercise, then there's no point in me even participating because I already have this ideal body type according to society.
Yeah. You know how many times I've been told that I don't need to work out?
Yeah. Which is crap. If you want, like, not because you need to change your body, but because
it's just like, like that's so, that meant like, it's, oh my God, that's infuriating.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. Like it's messed up on so many levels. And that kind of reinforces what I was saying earlier of like, people think once you like achieve, which I didn't do anything to achieve this body that I exist in, but they assume if you have that, then you don't have to do anything anymore. And that's like kind of silly if you think about it, because like why would you think you're just going to keep that up forever? Anyway,
right.
Just and so the crap out of me.
Yeah. And so since diet culture has kind of like given a very narrow-minded view of exercise for people like that who are in a naturally thin body, they're like, okay, well, like there's no point in making myself uncomfortable through intense exercise, because why am I going to punish myself because
Right.
exercise is related to punishment now because of diet culture? They're just not going to do it. Whereas on the flip side, diet culture also operates from a perspective of shame, because someone in a larger body is most likely going to feel pressured and forced into exercising, and forced by shame, regardless of whether or not they want to exercise, just so that they can fit in. So I just want to make the blanket statement that all bodies, big or small, can benefit from an active lifestyle, and everyone should be equally encouraged to do so in whatever form of movement they want or don't want. There doesn't need to be any rules. And so it's just frustrating that diet culture has completely taken and stripped exercise of like the facts that we know about it. And it only focuses on weight loss, and it just takes the focus off of so many other positive benefits that can help with, whether it's depression, whether it's sleep, mood, like there's such a
with others.
Yeah, like community. There's such a huge list. And so I want to quickly touch on, I'm just going to read them, a couple phrases and like wording to just like watch out for if you are either like, I don't know what diet culture is about, but I want to learn more about it, like, and I want to see how it's like wrapped itself up in like every aspect of fitness, or if you're trying to break away from it, and like just need to be on guard because there's so many phrases and words that people are using all of the time, and it can be so easy to like believe it and like buy into it and like slip back into the mindsets that people are kind of like throwing around, who may not even know that they're like being run by diet culture rules. So a lot of the fad and like very prevalent phrases that you hear in exercise and fitness that are wrapped up in diet culture beliefs are things such as like a 12-week body transformation challenge, or a 4-8 however many week fat loss program. Even phrases like instructors and coaches, trainers trying to encourage you, but they'll say things like burn off the weekend, or excuses don't burn calories, or like a Friday night you're in a workout class and they're like, oh, like push yourself a little bit extra so that you can earn that like beer tonight, or like earn that meal tomorrow. I've heard that in workout classes before.
Sunday you're burning off whatever you.
Yep. Oh, like burn off, like, yeah, New Year's celebration lesson, whatever. Even things like summer bodies are made in the winter, or like we're going into like summer bod mode. Like, this is cliche, but if you have a body, you have a summer body, because anybody can go to the beach and put a bathing suit on. Like, you don't like obtain a summer bod just by having muscles and like abs. Like, you don't, it's infuriating to me. So those are like some very common phrases, themes, wording that you're going to hear from people that are wrapped up in diet culture. That's just something to be aware of. Or even if like you're an instructor or a trainer who like wants to make sure that you're not giving off this message as well, like those are things to maybe be cautious of, because it can be very easy, like just being a trainer, like there are phrases that I'll say not diet culture related, but like you get in just kind of like a pattern of like saying things to encourage people. Like when I do my like live workouts on Instagram, like my like phrase that I like go to all the time is like, oh, like beautiful, like that's beautiful, good job guys. Like I always say like beautiful work. And it's just kind of like a phrase that I say. And so if you've been like wrapped up in diet culture for so long, it can be very like second nature to just kind of say these phrases.
I love that you use that particular thing, because something I've been thinking about while you've been talking is like, how sad is it that we've just like with food, like the true beauty of the like the taste and the pleasure and the connection that we can have from it, but how much that's stripped away. And for some people it's completely eliminated because of extreme disordered behavior or eating disorders that our culture like perpetuates. But like with movement, the things that we can do physically with our body really is beautiful. And again, that's not limited to what you look like, but just like ways we can like move and things we can do. It can feel beautiful, it can look beautiful, and it is. And if you lose sight of that, like it just makes me sad. And again, not because I'm like, oh, like you can have the life I have, like I still have a lot of problems in my life, but like you just don't deserve to have that as one that's added, because it's nonsensical.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard that noise. I don't know.
Did it?
Nala made a really weird noise. She's like snoozing so hard on the couch.
But yeah, that's cool. But that makes sense that you would like, people would just get into the habit of saying it. And probably because a lot of them think that's what people want to hear from them, because that's what's been taught.
Yep. Yeah. So not only has diet culture made like fitness almost exclusive to like certain people, but it's also like made it exclusive to certain forms of movement and how you move your body and how you exercise, because since diet culture is wrapped up in the driving factor of like only using exercise to change your body and to lose weight, it really only focuses on and pushes a select few forms of movement, which are ones that we know can cause your body to lose weight, whether you do it in an extreme way or not, right? So like specific exercises that are supposed to yield physical changes and results are things such as like HIIT, so like super high intensity workouts, tons of running, intense exercises like burpees and stuff like that. And so because of that, people start to like think of exercise and fitness in a very narrow-minded way, and they don't branch out and explore all other forms of movement that can simply serve the purpose of making you feel good. And so then if someone doesn't like burpees or running a ton of miles, but like thinks that's the only way that you can like be into fitness, again, that's going to cause them to go the opposite direction and be like, well, I just don't want to have anything to do with it. Or it's going to go the other way and force people to be like, all right, well, I guess I have to go run 20 miles a week, even though I don't like running. And then it's going to perpetuate this thought of like punishment and pain and restriction. Movement, honestly, should be thought of in the completely opposite lens. It should like joy, and it should bring like it increases your endorphins. So like it should be a positive thing, but diet culture has twisted it into punishment and restriction and discipline. And if you don't work out 6 days a week, like you're not disciplined enough, like you're not good enough, you're not fit enough.
Right. And like what is it inside that makes you, well, what the culture has got that problem for one reason, but what inside makes us feel like you're inadequate because you don't do that is not going to be fixed by doing that. Sometimes the growth work can happen simultaneously, but it is not the end result. I've never seen it be the end result of someone just being disciplined, fixing life.
Yeah. And it also like can cause you, like it also can like put negative emotions and self views of yourself, because say you're someone who you don't want to do these like forms of exercise that diet culture is saying that you should do in order to lose weight, then if you're not doing it, like you're second guessing yourself, you're second guessing your motivation and your ability to like accomplish something, when you're not the problem. You're not the one who lacks like the ability to do something. It's just, since diet culture operates in such a narrow-minded way in fitness, you're then going to doubt yourself and doubt your ability to self-motivate and like doubt whatever it is about yourself because you don't want to participate. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so like there's a ton of people who, granted, I love burpees. Like not because of like the effects that they can have on your body. Like I think it's a fun movement. I've always like loved to do them. And I think it's a really fun and a cool movement, but
and that's a weird one that a lot of people don't like to do and complain about. Not as punishing sounding as burpees, but like it's a genuinely joyful movement for me.
And so like, because forms of exercise like burpees and tons of running, like many people don't want to do that, but that's basically what diet culture is telling you that you should do in order to like slim down. It doesn't even necessarily always even achieve those aesthetic looks that were promised. So then because you're doing something that's causing a lot of physical discomfort if you don't want to do it in the first place, and then to back it up, you're not seeing the results that it's promising you and giving you pain and discomfort to do them, like, of course, that's why so many people are struggling with motivation, you know? So it's just like this cycle that makes you feel like crap.
Yeah, failure is not motivating.
Yeah, if you're not conforming to its rules.
Feeling like a failure does not motivate you either. Right. So it's like, it is an end result and it's a beginning result. And it just doesn't, there's no point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's just, I think we're going to do an episode where we talk more about like intuitive eating and intuitive movement, because I think intuitive movement also comes into play here. And I don't want to talk too much about it in this episode, but it kind of takes away your ability to make a decision for yourself. And it takes away the ability to tune into your body and listen to what your body needs, because it tells you have to push hard, you have to work hard, you have to work out X amount of days to like benefit yourself, in air quotes, when in reality it could actually be doing the polar opposite. Because if your body is exhausted, if your adrenals are worn out, and like at a hormonal cellular level your body is burnt out, but diet culture is telling you that you have to continue to work out, it's actually going to do the polar opposite of what it's saying it's going to do. And I can speak personally and be like a testimony to that, because I ignored my body. I ignored like what it was telling me. I didn't care that my hormones and my adrenals were shot. I was like, no, I have to be running X amount of miles because like I didn't know it at the time, but it was diet culture that was like ruling in the way that I worked out and viewed myself. And
yeah, that's the thing. Like, we don't just like, yes, there are people who are more predisposed to behaviors like that and then becoming like a full-blown disorder, which again, it's not about a hierarchy of who has it worse, but there are certain phases of disorder behavior that, you know, change the game of what we're working on. But nobody just sits around and is like, oh yeah, I want to punish myself. That stuff is taught to us. Like, we're not inherently broken people. We're just taught to be disconnected from our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we're taught as women that we have to look a certain way to be beautiful. Like, and we have to make a certain amount of money to be worthy. It's like, it goes on and on and on about these achievements we have to have, but they're not equitable and they're not realistic.
Yep.
And so like, I know life's not fair or whatever, but if not everyone has access to those things, then it's probably not as much of a priority and a need mm-hmm. as we make it out to be.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And so I think if you're dreading your workouts, if you're doing it for punishment, if you're doing it to make up for something, like if you're doing it for restriction, I would really encourage you to like evaluate like the driving factor behind that, especially if you're someone who feels controlled and consumed by this, but like wants to break free from it. Like, you need to come back to yourself and you need to come back to like, what is my intention behind this? Because if your intention is rooted in something that, yeah, is slightly superficial, and something such as only participating in exercise to change the way that you look or to maintain a certain aesthetic that you can't otherwise maintain if you like stop your exercise routine.
Exactly.
You're going to be left super unhappy and very discontent.
Yeah.
Whether that's right off the bat or whether that's 10 years after you partaking in a specific routine. At some point, it's going to fail you because your body was made to change. And we say this all the time, but like, hopefully your body does change. Like, we don't want to stay stagnant, just like mentally and emotionally. Like, we don't want to stay stagnant. Hopefully we're continuing to grow and move forward as life goes on. And so it's kind of silly to think that our bodies wouldn't be doing the same.
Yeah.
And so diet culture has kind of set this preface and like precedent that we're like, you need to constantly be fighting yourself. And whether or not it's directly telling you that, like, that's the message that you're receiving, that you need to be fighting yourself, that you're against your body, that it doesn't work for you, like it's against you, because so many people feel like their bodies are failing them.
And that is like probably one of the worst possible places to exist, is where you feel like the thing that keeps you alive is failing you.
Yep. And I've been there. And there's still some days where my mind goes there because of like changes and some help, whatever. That's besides the point. But I think like you need to root your mindset in something that's not going to be as inconsistent, because like if that's the only reason you're exercising, like I said, it's going to leave you super unfulfilled and unsatisfied, because it's like you're placing your worth and something that you hope to stay consistent in something that is completely inconsistent and always going to be changing and always going to be evolving. And I think like that's also like, you need to remember that like if you're in this for life, which, you know, hopefully if you're moving your body, which we know is good for, like, take away aesthetics, like we know that movement in some form or another is good for our bodies. Like hopefully realizing that you're going to be doing that for life, like, and that there's no deadline for being active, like then how you choose to move your body as life changes is going to look different year to year. And like, that's okay. And the best routine in terms of fitness for you is the one that you can consistently do at this specific time in your life. And so, yeah, like maybe you were fitter 2 years ago, or maybe you're the fittest you've ever been, or maybe you'll be fitter than you are now in like 5 years. Like, it doesn't really matter, because you need to find like what works for you in the present moment. And remember that our lives change, our routines change. So inevitably, like, it's silly to think that if our day-to-day routine and our lives are changing, like, why wouldn't our fitness routines, why wouldn't our bodies change as well? Like,
yeah, you're right.
It's kind of inevitable. And I think the quicker you realize that and can accept that and work with that as opposed to against it, you're going to find a lot more freedom and contentment in every area of your life, not just fitness.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know. I think something like ways to kind of challenge it and like help yourself in terms of fitness. I say this all the time because I think the mental aspect is so important. Like you have to work on changing the language in your head and what you're telling yourself. And like kind of shift the focus to like, I'm moving your body because you love yourself, not because you hate yourself, and moving your body because you respect and you want to take care of yourself, not because you hate yourself or your body or want to punish or change it. And it can be a really cool like mental shift to change it from like physical aesthetics and physical based goals to like performance based goals. Like, okay, if you're a runner and I ran 5 miles last week and you're trying to like up it for, I don't know, like a race, like a performance based goal is going to be so much more like fulfilling and grounded as opposed to an aesthetic one, because you can always like improve and work on a skill.
Right.
You know?
Or focusing on how it affects your mental well-being, or like your job performance or your relationships with people, because it's an outlet for you, whether it's connecting with them through the exercise or because you're giving yourself that time to move your body and get that that out of your system, whatever's going on in the day, and that like give that release of dopamine.
Yeah.
It can impact your, yourself and others, which I'm not saying you have to think about that, but it can be a really good benefit for those reasons as well.
Yeah. and it helps you connect with your body, because it helps you to honor what your body needs instead of insisting on training in a way that's dictated by diet culture rules and by what diet culture says you should or have to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of that applies with the nutrition as well. Like, okay, well, if that's diet culture, what am I supposed to do? Well, eat regularly throughout the day. Remember that food is fuel, in the sense of not trying to make your body look this perfect standard, but to literally give you energy. The number of times I've had to remind people, like, if I could get a nickel for that, I would be quite wealthy, because we forget, because that's so sad. Like, it's food. It's to fuel our body. That's the point. And we think we're not supposed to eat it. Yeah. It's what keeps us alive and able to do all the things that we want to have these hot bodies to do anyway. So that's really unfortunate, isn't it?
Yep.
You can't even live if you don't eat.
And I don't know if I think this sounds slightly familiar when I say it, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. But I like just making a simple shift in your mind from because the word calories, I feel like, has such a negative connotation around it, because we want less calories, because we've been taught, the more calories you eat, the more weight you gain, which that's crap. And so calories, if you can just change the simple word in your head from calories to energy, I think that's a good place to start as well. Because even when I was in Spain, and the food nutrition labels, it says energy, the translation from
good point, because that's what it means.
It says energy and then the calorie number, and that's what it is. Food is fuel. Food gives you energy, and you need energy to live.
Yeah.
So
I like it.
Yep.
So I really encourage you to check out some of the resources that we provide in today's episode, just to do some of your continual exploration. Is there anything else on your mind? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. We hope that you're doing well in another week of this craziness. If you want to keep up with what we've got going on, you can follow us on Instagram if you don't already, at FitFueledFree. My personal page is DMarliaL, and Jenna's is JenUpFit. We also have a Gmail account, fitfueledfree@gmail.com, where you can send us any questions, comments, or concerns. We're uploading our episodes, since we've had to do Zoom recordings onto YouTube now, so you can find us there, FitFueledFree. And Jenna's doing at-home workouts and has her guide, and I have my Healing Relationship with Food guide out, so more details on that can be found on both of our Instagram pages. And as always, if you could give us a like and follow, rating and review, we appreciate that, so we can help to reach more people. So thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.